All right, so here we are. I got everything in the car. The transmission is on, the header is on, test pipe. I have the titanium exhaust on here. I installed the intake. All the lines are tightened, all the sensors are hooked up except for a few of those D5 ones. Got the radiator topped off. The radium catch cans are on. Currently don't have anything holding this, but I ordered the part, so it's just kind of sitting there right now. In the back, we have the radium surge tank hooked up. I'll clean up the wiring once I got this interior out. And then here's a little bit of the exhaust. So this is the 10.2 pound Buddy Club N1 exhaust system. And then under here, this is a Putty Mod Stage 2 with the OS Geiken in it with Hasport differential mounts. And those are some DSS 2.9 axles. These are good for 500 horsepower. And on the diff, we have a EVS differential cooler. I'm sorry, it's not a differential cooler, but it's a high capacity diff cover that has provisions built into it so you can run a cooler if you need on here. I never had problems with the stock setup and overheating, so I don't think I'll need a cooler on this one either. Currently just has a stock sway bar. So the thing is ready for first start. All right, so here we go. I've already primed the motor, coolant is topped off, and there goes nothing. There we go. Seems to be idling well. It's loud. So the car's running, and it seems like it's running pretty healthy. Oil pressure looks a little bit high and doing some funky stuff, so see what's up with the gauge there. But the water temp and the coolant temp, I guess they're also doing something funny, so I'll have to trace that down. I got one check engine light, and I already looked at it. It is the rear O2 sensor, which I can just turn off with FlashPro. It's not plugged in anyway, and you can see this car just cracked 24,000 miles, so low mile chassis. But there's no drips. Nothing smoking. Just working on getting all the air out of the cooling system. But all I did was forget to hook up the sensors. That's why they're reading funky. So just did another shot of bleeding on the air. Let's go for another start. Hopefully these gauges are going to be working correctly. I'll be getting rid of this one because it's too much of my line of sight for the track. So I got a barrel pod that will be replacing this. So that'll look good. It looks like the gauges are now working. So let's see what they do. There we go. So it looks like oil temps are 160-ish, 170. Water temp is sitting around 200, just under that. And we're getting about 40, let's call it 30 PSI of oil pressure. It's pretty healthy, but the oil's not fully up to temp yet. So we'll just let the engine keep doing its thing and filtering out the air bubbles. The process for this is normally you run your heat and do it, but here, since I don't have the heater core or it's not connected and all those lines are bypassed, I'll just have the front of the car jacked up higher than the rear and just keep bleeding it from this little valve right there. Let some air bubbles work through here as well, and that's it. It's just over and over until you get all the air out. So it looks like some stuff is burning off the header. It's a brand new header. Might have leaked some oil when I was topping it off, and they put some stuff on there when they ship them, but it seems like this motor's running healthy. Let me get it all squared away with the coolant, and I'll do a compression test on it when it's hot. So the motor's running. I got this thing little set up here in the radiator, and it's just feeding any bubbles out. I think I got most of the bubbles out using the old-fashioned method. And yes, I am running coolant in the car at the moment because this car is going to be sitting all winter long in my garage while it gets work done to it. So I don't want any issues with that freezing over. But once the season starts, come spring, it'll be getting a water mixture with the Redline water wetter, as required by all the sanctioning bodies for wheel-to-wheel racing. All right, so in the car, gonna work on getting that check engine light off for that rear O2 sensor. So I'm gonna pick the closest configuration I can do to what I have at the moment, and that's gonna be the 310cc injectors with the cat pack header and an intake. So these are what some of the default configurations in FlashPro look like. So let's get that loaded onto the car. So right here inside the FlashPro configuration, we can go to the closed loop thing and then disable the secondary oxygen sensor, which we're not using. All that thing does is ensure the efficiency of the catalytic converter. Well, this car does not have a catalytic converter. We don't care about any emission stuff. So we will upload this configuration to the car, and that should turn off the check engine light. So that sensor is not plugged in whatsoever in the car. All right, moment of truth. Let's see if this configuration works. Turn the key. You'll hear the surge tank in the back priming, and it is ready to start. And there we go. No check engine light. All right, so time for the compression test. Very simple test. It involves removing all the spark plugs, coil packs, and disengaging the fuel system simply by the means of pulling the fuel pump fuse. So the engine is nice and hot. Hook up my compression tester at this thing, and we'll crank the motor and see how much compression this thing is making on all cylinders. I'm not going to go through every single cylinder here on video at least, but I'll give you an idea of what this looks like. So spark plugs are out, fuel system disabled. I put battery, extra plug-in battery onto the battery just because we're going to be cranking a lot. We'll just watch what the compression does. We're up to cylinder 3 already, and then the first 2 cylinders, I got about 240, 245, which is perfect. So this one we're looking at just under 240, maybe 239 or so, spot on. So couldn't ask for more. Do the last cylinder, and then we'll plug this thing back together. Right, so last cylinder is done. Roughly it was about 240 psi of compression across the first 3 and about 250 on that rear one, which is for some reason typical on these 06 Plus cars in my experience. Nominal compression per the Honda service manual is 225 psi with a variance of 10%. So this one is well within spec. In fact, most healthy S2000 motors I've dealt with are around 240, and anything less than 230, I start scratching my head and wondering what's going on with it. So this one's well within range, and most importantly with the compression test, rather than just the raw numbers, you're looking for the variation between the 2 cylinders or 3 cylinders and 4 cylinders, whatever you're dealing with on an engine. So this one is well within tolerance, just a couple PSI difference, and it's healthy. So this thing should make some really good power on the dyno. So another pro tip putting these motors back together, putting the plugs back in, you must torque these down to the Honda specified torque. And it's extremely important. I've mentioned this before, I can't emphasize this enough. Basically, what has happened to a number of cars is they were not torqued down properly. The spark plug came loose and then has destroyed a motor because of that. These are not easy to find motors. They're not cheap. You take care of them, they'll last you forever. But if you don't, you're going to be out of luck. So very important, torque down your spark plugs to spec. Also, torque down your oil filter to spec, which I just did a little while ago, and I'll be paint marking that so I can just keep an eye on it at the track. All right, so the spark plugs are back in, the fuel injector fuse is back, everything is plugged back in, torqued down to spec. And now I have reasonable assurance that this is a healthy motor. I know that there's no air left in the cooling system. I've checked the oil levels, everything is spot on. I've torqued down the subframe and every bolt that is surrounding the motor. I've checked all the lines and done my due diligence. So next thing, I'm gonna start by making sure that my garage floor is spotless. It's not a single drip of anything down there. And I'm gonna let this motor run for about an hour or so and see when I get back if there's anything there. Really simple way to make sure you don't have any leaks, especially when you've been taking this thing apart and putting things in the oiling system and the coolant system and starting with the new motor. You want to address these issues before you get to the track. And the best way to do it is right in your garage. You don't want to be dealing with this stuff trackside. So I'll get it started up, I'll let it hang out, go do whatever for a while, and come back, check the temps, check the floor, see if I see any leaks, and that's really it. I think the motor is good to go. So ran into one small problem here. This engine had a brand new blade timing chain tensioner on it, and somebody commented in my videos to take a good look at that product, and I did. I read some pretty poor reviews on it, and one of the guys from Inline Pro also mentioned that he noticed some noise coming from the timing chain. I thought I heard it as well, so I'm not going to take any chances with this thing. I'm going to take this off, and Inline Pro, again, they're local to me, so I'll just run over there and pick up a new timing chain tensioner from there. All right, so nothing ever goes 100% smoothly with these sort of things, but that blade timing chain tensioner was making noise, so I ran over to Inline Pro. I bought up one of theirs, so let me get this thing put together into a motor, and hopefully that will resolve the timing chain noise that I had. It's a little disappointing. That was a brand new Ballad tensioner, no miles on it. Unfortunately, I didn't buy it. It was on the motor. My friend put it on prior to me getting this motor, but you know, kind of really shows the quality of some of these aftermarket components. Inline Pro, Billman, they use the OEM housing on these timing chain tensioners. Honda does it the best. They know what they're doing. So the less stuff you change on this car, the better. It seems to be the common theme. So let's get this on and see if the noise goes away. All right, so new Inline Pro timing chain tensioner is on. And there's no more noise coming from the timing chain. Surprise, surprise. So there you have it. Now the motor is 100% ready to go. All right, so underneath the car here, we have the AP2V2 clutch slave cylinder, and this is a new piece on the car. Anyway, in the 2004 and up model year cars through 2009, they changed it from the old style setup, which I picked up used on eBay. So the major difference here, other than how it looks, is that there's a clutch delay valve that's built into that, and it's fine for the street, but that's going to be no good for a race car. So going to get that piece off, swap it out with the older model year, and good to go. All right, so the old one is off, and I got the new one ready to go. So I'll get this mounted up, but before I do, I'm going to take this push rod out and show you a little trick on how to smooth out the engagement on this. So let's get that going. Here's the trick. If you look at this push rod for the slave cylinder, you'll see that there's all sorts of imperfections in it. There's that little dimple at the top. So the trick is this: stick it in a drill, get this thing spinning, take a piece of sandpaper, polish it off, get that lip off, and that will help with the engagement of the clutch. And before you put it on, throw some urea grease on there for smoothness, and that's really it. It's a really quick mod that will really help with the feel with the clutch. And we're done sanding it down. Get that thing in focus so you can see it looks considerably better than it did prior. All right, let's get this thing on the car. All right, so the AP1 clutch slave cylinder is on the car with the boot, in case you were wondering if I would forget to put that in, but it's on. And while we're under here, this is the new innovative transmission mount. 75A is the diameter of that polyurethane bushing. Compared to this piece that came out, this massive thing was the OEM mount, so really soft rubber bushings on there. Move the transmission around quite a bit, which is no good when you're trying to shift quickly. So that's up there. There's quite a bit of fluid loss when swapping out the old one and the new one, which is no big concern because I'm going to replace the fluid anyway in here. So my fluid of choice, Castrol SRF. I use this in the brakes as well as the clutch, and this stuff is just awesome. I've used a number of fluids in the past for the brake system: AT Super Blue, Motul 660, you know, all that popular stuff, but I would always have to bleed every weekend the brakes. With this stuff, you put it in once a year and you're good to go. So it's expensive at 60 something dollars a bottle, but this is the Cadillac of brake fluids. And then just go underneath there with the little bleeder bottle, an 8 mil, top this off, let the thing gravity bleed itself, and we're good to go. All right, so the clutch sleeve is topped off there, fresh fluid, everything seems to be working well. I put the heat shield back over the header, and I put the little AC line thing. I'll figure out a clever way to cover those holes once that whole entire heater core is removed there. And the TCT is in, and looks like everything's done. I got the OEM hood back on the car. Now, believe it or not, the OEM factory hood weighs less. It's an aluminum hood. It weighs less than the Cybon carbon fiber hood. So it kind of just shows how good of a job Honda did while producing this car. We've already seen two things that I've taken off that were from the aftermarket that were not as good as the factory. So again, just sticking with trying to leave as much stuff factory as possible on this car for maximum reliability. So we got this thing on here. If you notice, there's three little adjustments here on both sides. So it didn't click at first, and then I did a quick little search, and you can just maneuver this around with these three bolts and get the hood adjusted to where you want it. I took out the reservoir that goes right behind the battery. That's for the windshield wiper fluid. And I'm pretty much done. I'm waiting on a couple of parts now. The parts I'm waiting on is some hydraulic hood struts so I can get rid of this hood prop thing here. I'm also waiting on a couple of radium petcocks so I can drain these without removing them or unscrewing the canister bodies, which will help. So I'll drain it somewhere just around this area. In addition to that, engine-wise, I'm pretty much good to go. I need to seal off the radiator. I have a cooling plate that needs to go back on here. Check all the fittings, run the motor a little bit more. I took all the lines and tucked them neatly behind the engine bay, zip tied stuff up. So the stuff that you saw running across the engine bay before for the DeFi sensors is now just all tucked wherever I could have tucked it. And it is looking pretty clean. My goal was to be able to make this motor as simple as possible to remove on a whim in case I ever needed to. And I'm sure I will need to at some point. And mission accomplished.